This is lecture 7, chapter 20, which we're going to cover the microbial disease of the nervous system and eyes. This is divided in two parts. Your nervous system has the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So you remember the central nervous system, which is your CNS, has your brain and your spinal cords, and the peripheral nervous system has everything that extends from it. Your brain has several main parts. The cerebrum, which controls your voluntary muscles, perception, and thinking. The cerebellum controls many involuntary body movements. The brainstem, which controls your breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and the spinal cord, which extends from the brainstem to the lumbar region. Here we have a look into your brain and also into the lumbar section. And as you know, we have the meninges, which is the part that protects the brain from trauma and barrier from bone, which is known also as the blood-brain barrier. And it extends all the way down to your spinal cord. I'm not going to go too much into details. We did this in anatomy and physiology. And this talks about the structures of peripheral nervous systems, which is basically the nerves that extends out of your spinal cords. You have the sensory nerves, motor nerves, and your mixed nerves. The cells of the nervous system, there's two basic cell types, that is the neuroglia and the neurons. The neuroglia, they provide support, they regulate transmissions. They also build the blood-brain barrier, the myelin sheaths, and they also phagocytize microbes. These are your microglias. They are special macrophages. The neurons, they carry nerve impulses. What is a synapse? The synapse is when you actually send a signal from one neuron to the next one through the synaptic cleft. And your neurotransmitters is where the chemical signals between cells move from one cleft to the other. Okay, now we're going to go into the microbiology component. The portals of infection of the central nervous system. The CNS is an axonetic environment. That means it has no normal microbiota. The pathogen may access the CNS several ways: breaking into the bone and meninges, maybe through a medical procedure, maybe because they travel in peripheral neurons to the central nervous system. There's an infection that kills the cells of the meninges, causing meningitis, or there's an inflammation that can alter the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. Tell me why. Bacterial disease of the nervous system. Bacteria cause disease in two ways. They can infect cells of the nervous system via the meninges, cause meningitis, and leprosy, or leprosy rather. Bacteria growing elsewhere releases toxins that affect neurons. This can cause botulism or tetanus. Bacterial meningitis. The signs and symptoms: sudden high fever, the meningeal inflammation, and you can see an increase in white blood cells, especially when they look into the cerebrospinal fluid. The inflammation causes most of the signs and symptoms. The infection of the brain cells also causes the inflammation of the brain, which is known as an encephalitis. And this can also result ultimately into death. The pathogens and virulence factors. In the case of bacteria, 5 species causes 90% of these meningitis: Neisseria, Streptococcus, Haemophilus, Listeria, and Streptococcus. Opportunistic members of the normal microbiota can also cause meningitis. What do I mean by opportunistic? Let's look into Neisseria meningitis. This is a gram-negative diplococci. Okay, this is the little guy that you see right over here. It is also known as meningococcus. He has a fimbrial capsule, and this actually it's a defense mechanism which makes it more difficult for the white blood cells to catch it and get rid of it. This is the capsule that protects them from phagocytic lysis. They release lipid A into the body, and this actually is what triggers the fever, inflammation, shock, and clotting. The next one is the Streptococcus pneumoniae. It happens to be also a diplococci, gram-positive. It is the leading cause of the meningitis in adults. This capsule that it has, again, protects the bacteria from digestion by the phagocytes, and it releases enzymes and toxins that enable the bacteria to counterattack the immune defense from the white blood cells. And they also have phosphorylated choline, which triggers endocytosis by the cells. Haemophilus influenza is a gram-negative. It is a coccobacillus. It is actually an obligate parasite of humans and some animals. That means that it only affects these humans and animals. It also has a capsule, and there's actually different Haemophilus strains, and that is discovered based on the different antigens that they have in the capsule itself. Before vaccination time, this was most cause of meningitis. The Listeria monocytogenes. This is gram-negative coccobacillus. It actually enters the body through contaminated food or drink. It is rare, especially in healthy adults. However, it can occur in pregnant women, fetuses, newborns, and in the elderly, and especially people that are immunocompromised. They produce lysins, which is a toxin, which protects the bacteria from phagocytic ingestion or digestion. Streptococcus agalactiae. This is a Lancefield group B, which means it's beta hemolytic. It is a normal vaginal microbiota in some women. However, it is an opportunistic, and that means it can actually become infectious disease or an infectious bacteria. This is a diagram indicating how these pathogens enter into the meninges. It's an overview of all the ones we just discussed. So let's talk about the epidemiology. Again, the influenza was the leading cause of the bacterial meningitis prior to vaccination, as we discussed just a little earlier. Now the pneumonia and meningitis are the most prevalent. However, the agalactiae is the leading cause in the newborns. It is not usually spread by cultural contact. Okay, the meningococcal meningitis can become epidemic because it is spread among individuals in barracks and dorms, and that's what happens a lot lately through students that happen to share dorms, for example, in universities or colleges. The listeria is not transmitted among humans except from mother to fetus. Diagnosis. Well, the diagnosis is always done through looking at symptoms and, of course, taking a culture of bacteria from the cerebrospinal fluid. It's treated with intravenous antimicrobial drugs. There is vaccines available. Again, vaccine is to prevent. Remember that. Okay, these are not going to cure. It's just for prevention of the actual infection. Administration of penicillin at birth does reduce the neonatal meningitis, and the individual at risk of listeriosis should avoid high-risk foods because, as you know, it comes from food contamination. Okay, leprosy. This is another type of disease, and we have different types of leprosy: tuberculosis, lepromatous. Tuberculosis leprosy is not progressive. This shows some mediated immune response. However, in the case of lepromatous, it is more virulent form of the disease. The weak cells mediated immune response, what happens, a lot of people think is a skin disease, but no, it actually gets into your nerve endings, and then once your skin or legs, your fingers rather, don't have those nerve endings, they start to break down. And it goes throughout your extremities first and then throughout your body if not treated. However, this death rate is actually very low. Hansen's disease is caused by Mycobacterium leprae. It is a gram-positive bacillus, and since it's a mycobacterium, that means it creates mycolic acids, and that means that you can actually identify it through the microscope through acid fast. It grows very low. It does have protection from phagocytic lysis, so that means it can grow within the phagocytes, and it is resistant to many antimicrobial drugs. Mycobacterium leprae grows best in cooler regions of the body, and it can live inside infected cells for years. However, as I mentioned to you earlier, it can destroy nerves and other tissues, and those are your connective tissues. It is becoming more and more rare, and especially in the lepromatous leprosy, and is transmitted by contact or breaks in the loose skin. Hansen's disease, the diagnosis is based on the signs and symptoms. But again, since this is an acid-fast microorganism, we can do an acid-fast microscopy test. It can be treated with multiple antimicrobials. The treatment can be lifelong for some patients, especially since I already mentioned it can stay inside the body for a long period of time. Therefore, they have to have a lifelong treatment sometimes. The Bacillus calmette-guerin vaccine actually provides some protection, but again, as mentioned earlier, it is a vaccine, so that's a preventive measurement. Another bacterial disease of the nervous system is botulism. Botulism is actually not that common anymore, but it still is. Apparently, it occurs an intoxication from three manifestations. The first one is through foodborne botulism. Okay, that means you have endospores present in some of the food, such as honey, and then that causes botulism. The infant actually ingests the endospores, and then he actually goes into progressive paralysis on both sides of the body. There is a slow recovery from growth of the nerve cell endings. Wound botulism is the contamination of a wound by endospores. The symptoms are similar to those of foodborne botulism. And like you can see here in the picture, the infant that has this disease happens to have hypotonia. What does that mean, hypotonia? It is caused by Clostridium botulinum, and it happens to be a gram-positive endospore-forming bacillus. So how we can determine what it is? Well, we can do an endospore test via microscopy also. It is common worldwide, and this different strain produce one of the 7 neurotoxins. So how does it act? If you look at figure A here, in your normal neuromuscular junction between your synaptic cleft, that is your nerve ending, you will have your acetylcholine transmitted from one to the other. But when you have the toxin present right here, it stops from the actual acetylcholine to be sent to the nerve ending, and that's where you get the hypotonia. Okay, when we look into the epidemiology, there's around 30 cases of foodborne and wound botulism per year US. The most common, which is, as you can see, is very rare, it happens to be infant. This is a diagnosis, treatment, and prevention. Well, they do an intestinal tract wash so they can remove the Clostridium. The administration of botulism immune globulin. Basically, it's a drug given, and there's also treatment of antimicrobial drugs. This is done to actually get rid of the endospores. And another way to get rid of it is to make sure you get rid of endospores and contaminated food, and that is by good measurements of cooking. In botulism, there's 4 approaches to treatment. You want to keep an open and functional airways, because remember, hypotonia can also affect your airways. Again, wash the intestinal tract. To administer botulism immune globulin neutralized toxin, and as already mentioned, treat by antimicrobial drugs. And why should not children under 1 year old not consume honey? Next bacterial disease of the nervous system to be discussed is the tetanus. Okay, this is sort of the opposite. I mean, they're not related, but as far as the signs and symptoms from botulism versus tetanus, here you have a tightening of the jaws, but also of other joints such as your elbows. You get an irregular heartbeat and blood pressure, and this is caused by another pathogen. This is the Clostridium tetani, and it's found in soil, dust, and the intestine of humans and animals. If you happen to actually get tetanus, what happens is you get a neurotoxin known as tetanospasm, and that's what it does to your joints. Okay, as you can see here, in your spinal cord, you will get a signal, and nerve impulse is transmitted. But here, with tetanospasm, it blocks the release of the neurotransmitter known as your GABA, and therefore that is why it makes the actual muscle lock. So how do you actually get tetanus? Well, through the breaking skin mucus, right? Make sure you put on the shoes so you don't get on those rusty nails. Your infection from the central nervous system determines the incubation period. How far away the wound is from the central nervous system, that's basically what it means. Mortality rate is rare. It's more or less about 50% if left untreated. Okay, definitely has decreased worldwide because of the immunization. But this tetanus shot does not last forever. I believe the average is between 5 to 10 years. Treatment: wound cleaning, passive immunotherapy, administration of antimicrobials, and to keep an active immunization. Tell me why. We are now going to continue with the viral disease of the nervous system. Now, these viruses more readily cross the blood-brain barrier because they're smaller, obviously. And that's why they also occur more frequently than bacterial or fungal infection. These are mostly known as your RNA viruses, which include your enteroviruses. Signs and symptoms for the viral meningitis, again, is an infection of the meninges, so it's very similar to bacterial. However, it's usually milder than bacterial or fungal. 90% of the cases are caused by RNA viruses. As I mentioned to you earlier, they're enteroviruses, but there's others. They're spread via fecal contamination of food, water, or hands, and it can also be spread by bloodstream to other organs following ingestion. Pathogenesis, well, infections of the meninges is meningitis. It can also be spread via respiratory droplets and feces. The diagnosis, same thing, through the cerebrospinal fluid. There is no specific treatment. It is difficult to prevent. Polio, also known as poliomyelitis. It is very common in the past, however, has been eradicated. It has been the second one to be eradicated after smallpox, basically. It is asymptomatic, almost 90% of the time. The minor polio is not specific symptoms. The non-paralytic is where you get muscle spasms and back pain. The paralytic polio produces paralysis, and the post-polio syndrome can be debilitating. Pathogen, well, poliovirus is the cause, and is transmitted more by drinks than food. Franklin Roosevelt, it's an important figure. Do you know who he was? He had polio. And as you can see, has been practically eradicated worldwide. Okay, where is it currently? A few countries, Africa or Asia. Difficult to control in this region because of factors such as political, religious tension. The sanitation is poor. We have hyperpopulation densities. And how is it diagnosed? Well, diagnosed by the virus in the throat of feces. There is no specific treatment now. And the most effective way to prevent it is vaccines. These are your comparison of polio vaccines. We're going to continue with viral disease. The next one is rabies. The signs and symptoms. Well, how do we get rabies? Most of you already know this. It is neurological. Once you get through hydrophobia, which means difficult swallowing, painful throat spasm, seizures, hallucination, paralysis, that's when you get it after you get the actual bite of another, mostly it could be anything. It could be a dog, it could be any, even a rodent, okay? It is caused by the Lysa virus, which is a single-stranded RNA virus. It's called Lysa because in Greek mythology, that was the myth for demon rage, because people pretty much went like kind of crazy, you know what I mean? The pathogenesis is via bite or scratch of an infected animal, as I mentioned, and the virus replicates in muscle cells and then moves into the neurons. Since it comes from animal to human, we call this zoonotic. We go into the diagnosis by neurological symptoms, the way that, the person reacts. We can also do post-mortem detection of negative, but that will be after the brain can be analyzed when the person is pretty much dead. We treat it with immunoglobulins, which is a shot, give it right into the stomach. There's also vaccines that can prevent it, and they will clean the infected site. This is also prevented by controlling rabies in domestic animals. Of course, we talk about domestic animals, but that cannot be done necessarily in wildlife organisms. And this is the portions we have skunks, foxes, or raccoons, which is the predominant reservoirs for the rabies. These neighbor bodies, again, this is analysis of the brain. Postmortem. And now we're going to go into another virus. And the West Nile virus, many people have the concept of the West Nile virus being from the area in Africa. However, there's many different ones. We have the Toga viridis, the Flaviviridis, and the Bunia viridis. As you can see, they come from different areas of the world. And some of them affect not only humans, some also affect horses. Your West Nile virus, also known as your arboviral encephalitis. Okay, they are arthropod-borne viruses. They are pretty much transmitted via mosquitoes, and they start reproducing in the intestinal tract. The mosquito arbovirus can cause the encephalitis, and since we have a zoonotic disease, there, even though they are zoonotic disease, they rarely affect humans, mostly horses. Okay, as you can see here, we have 6 different arboviruses. Diagnosis, well, the best way to find out is to look into the cerebral spinal fluid, since it causes encephalitis. Prevention, repellent, netting, and as you pretty much know that we live in a area that has many mosquitoes, is to eliminate the stagnant water. There is vaccines for horses in these different types of West Nile viruses or arboviral encephalitis. Tell me why. Mycosis of the nervous system is what we're going to talk next. But before, tell me why. So mycosis refers to what? Fungal disease. Okay? They mostly spread from the lungs to the central nervous system. These mushroom toxins that can produce hallucinations and neurological problems, and you probably are familiar with those. And we also have fungus that can produce meningitis. And these are known as your cryptococcal meningitis. Again, symptoms and signs are similar to the bacterial meningitis. It can lead to the loss of vision and coma. The Cryptococcus neoformans is a causative agent. These are two variant forms of yeast, which happen to resist phagocytosis by the defensive cells. One way to also look at the pathogen or the actual infection to determine the sign is through India ink, something that you have performed in your microbiology lab. Okay, what is the pathogenic in epidemiology? It's followed by inhalation of spores through your respiratory system. It's rare, but it actually happens to occur mostly in terminal AIDS patients. How do you do a diagnosis? Again, through the cerebrospinal fluid analysis. How is it treated? Antifungal drugs. And the hospital tried to prevent this through the contaminated air, especially through the vents. The next type of infectious disease of the nervous system are your protozoans. Okay, there's actually two diseases: African sleeping sickness and meningoencephalitis. The African sleeping sickness. There's actually three clinical stages. Is the site of the bite, which gives you the lesion. Then the parasite in the blood creates fever, the swelling of your lymph nodes, headaches, and then the protozoan happens to invade the central nervous system, which will cause the meningoencephalitis, sleep-wake cycle disruptions. That's why they call it African sleeping sickness. And then it will actually have a response to the circadian rhythm. You can actually do a parasite count with sickly waves of parasitemia, and the pathogen and virulence factors are caused by the Prytanosoma brucei. It happens to evade your immune system by changing surface in the glycoproteins of the actual cell membrane. This shows you the life cycle of the Trypanosoma brucei. As you can see, the arthropod vector is your tsetse fly. Okay. How is it diagnosed? Well, microscopic observation. You could look at it in the trypanosome via the blood, the lymph, the spinal fluid, or even a tissue biopsy. How do you treat it? Well, the sooner the better. How do we avoid it? With insecticide application, so it can help reduce the occurrence of the flies in the area. The next protozoan to be discussed happens to be the primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. Okay. Again, it is very similar to meningitis. We actually have causing agents, which are your acanthamoeba and Eugledia. These actually go through your skin or through your eyelids or even through your nose by inhalation of contaminated water. It is very rare, but it's super fatal. Okay, you detect these amoeba in samples from the eye or brain or in the cerebrospinal fluid. There's no drugs that actually have very success, because by the time they find it or find out what you have, it's kind of late. And this is a question for you to think about. If this is found in contaminated water, the next disease to talk about is the prine. This is also something that emerged not that long ago. Maybe it was present, but it happened to be a big thing during the 80s. Prines happen to cause spongiform encephalitis. You might have heard about mad cow disease. This happens also between tribes that happen to be practicing cannibalism. And what happens is that there is variants of this disease, and they also occur because of eating meat from the injected or infected, rather, excuse me, cattle meat. The VCJ disease, which is variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, it causes insomnia, weight loss, and memory failure. It goes into the progressive worsening of the voluntary and involuntary muscle control, and it is caused by abnormal form of prion proteins, and this is the one that causes mad cow or contaminated blood human products. The normal prions become abnormal, and this basically it's fatal because it actually forms spongiform cells in the brain. This happens to be also misleading. Sometimes they think this is just a type of dementia, but it's not. How do you get rid of it? Well, prions are very difficult to kill, as we discussed earlier, or to get rid of, because they actually have to auto-clean with high salt solutions or by incineration. The only way to prevent this is by not eating prion contaminated meats. Why is it called variant? To give you a hint, it has to do with geography. Okay, now we're going to go into microbial diseases of the eye. Okay, well, we know that the eye is one of the senses that are important for the nervous system. It is, of course, half of the function of the cerebrum. This is the eye and the components of the eye. And let's go into the diseases. Trachoma. This is the leading cause of non-traumatic blindness. Okay, that means because there has not been an impact to the eye, so it's non-traumatic. This is the scarring of the cornea, which later by later starts, to close out the eye. It's caused by the chlamydia trachomatis. Permanent discharge causes the deformed eyelids, and the scarring out, it can lead to ultimately blindness. Typically affects the children. However, as you can see in this picture, through surgery it can be removed. And with treatment, the trachoma is treated with antimicrobials. Other disease of the eye? Well, some of the common ones that you know about, the styes. Those are the ones that you get like an infection of the sebaceous gland. You have the ophthalmia neotorum, which is inflammation of the conjunctiva. And you have also the pink eye, right? As you know, this conjunctivitis, which can be caused by many different factors. And you also have keratitis, which is the inflammation of your cornea. Tell me why. And I will conclude chapter 20 of lecture 7.